So I have one last question for you. Mr. Secretary, who won the 2020 presidential election?
I'm not here to answer a question. We're talking about 2020. This is a Foreign Affairs Committee.
Okay, great. You can't answer the question, even though we all know that President Biden won. I don't answer the question
because the Secretary of State...
The committee footage you're about to watch is something every American should see for themselves. Representative Jacobs confronted Secretary Rubio head-on over the escalating conflict with Iran, but the hearing quickly became about far more than military policy. Watch the moment Jacobs presses him with one pointed question. $100 billion. For what? And don't miss the unresolved question about 2020 that remains unanswered until the very end. Watch now.
Constituents, Marines, San Diego Marines in the Middle East off the coast of Iran, the other of my constituents who are deployed there, and the thousands more of my constituents who have 48-hour deployment notices whose families are still very concerned. But okay, I will take you at your word. If the war is over, I have a simple question. Who won?
First of all, epic fury is over, which is what you would consider the war. That operation is
So you agree it's a war, then?
No, those are hostilities. They called it a war.
Okay.
I'm just responding to the Senator
Mr. Secretary, you can change the name of the operation. It doesn't change the fact that the Strait is still closed and my service members and all of our service members are still in harm's way. The war is not over. But I'm agreeing with you. Okay, fine. We're taking you at your word. The war is over. Who won?
Well, first of all, you're not taking me at my word. It's a fact. We're no longer conducting sustained strikes inside of Iran to degrade their military because epic fury is over. The second point is on the question of who won, I can tell you this. We defined victory as destroying their defense industrial base, significantly reducing the number of missile launchers that they possess, significantly reducing their stockpile of drones. And we achieved all of those in addition to destroying what they had left of an Air Force and wiping out their entire conventional Navy. Those are all gone. So I consider that victory, and we did too, and that was the purpose of epic fury.
Okay, well, good. Based on the metrics that you just said, okay, there's actually, our intelligence community has said that Iran is reconstituting its military industrial base faster than we had predicted, and analysts assess it still holds roughly 70% of its missile stockpile and 70% of its mobile launchers. The Strait of Hormuz was open before the war. It is now closed. We have lost 14 brave American service members, over 400 are injured, and the Iranian regime remains largely intact, but now with a more hardline leader who has more incentive to try and get a nuclear weapon. So I guess I have to ask you again, Mr. Secretary, does this actually look like winning or losing to you?
Well, the most intense segment of the hearing is starting now. They clashed over classified assessments and completely stalled on admitting the real cost of this operation. That alone set a serious tone for the room. But Representative Jacobs was not finished. If you want the honest truth about these military budgets, hit the like button and subscribe. Share below. Is $100 billion too high a price for this outcome? Watch as she shifts the focus to the financial consequences.
Well, first of all, I don't know what intelligence assessments you're referring to. We wouldn't discuss intelligence assessments if they were real.
These have been publicly reported.
Well, they're publicly reported. Someone committed a crime and, by the way, is also lying. And this happens all the time. People manipulate intelligence and analysis for purposes of furthering a narrative. On your point about the regime is actually deeply fractured, which is why it takes 7 to 10 days to get an answer from them for anything. Meanwhile, they're
fractured, but still intact.
Well, intact in the sense they can't even reach agreements that they can get back to us. So I don't know how intact that is. What they have is people that are afraid to go into the streets. Their repressive operations have held people back, in addition to the fact they've cut off the internet. But this is a country right now, and this regime that is facing hyperinflation, a completely devalued currency, hundreds of billions of dollars in damage to their military infrastructure, and frankly, all of the pre-existing problems that Iran had in their economy, which is why people were protesting, are worse, not better.
Sure,
and they have to deal with that too.
Mr. Secretary, so you're saying we're winning because the Iranian economy has inflation, it's cost them millions of dollars a day in lost revenue, and because it's going to cost them billions of dollars to rebuild. Well, we are having inflation. It's already cost us an estimated $100 billion. Gas prices are up with no end in sight. The average family is paying an extra $450 on gas and could pay an extra $2,000 by the end of the year. The American people are not stupid, Mr. Secretary. We all know that this war is not over. Just last night, the U.S. and Iran exchanged fire again, this time over Karg Island. We still have not reached a deal, despite the president's promise that a deal is right around the corner. The president even said today the blockade could last until Labor Day. It's now day 97 of the war that the president said he wanted to end quickly. So I have one last question for you. Mr. Secretary, who won the 2020 presidential election?
I'm not here to answer a question. We're talking about 2020. This is a foreign affairs committee.
Okay, great. You can't answer the question, even though we all know that President Biden won. I don't answer the question because the Secretary of State, I do not participate in domestic political issues. This is not about domestic political issues. This is about our democracy.
You're asking me to opine, just like I don't do campaign rallies.
It seems like
I don't do because as Secretary of State, we're not supposed to. That's been the long tradition of the department, and you should know that if you've been on this committee for any period of time.
Mr. Secretary, it seems like you have an issue admitting facts. You can't say that the president lost the 2020 election, just like you won't admit President Trump is losing this reckless war of choice, and just like you couldn't admit that the shoes the president bought you were too big. You clearly don't know what winning means, and not because the facts are unclear to you, it's because telling the truth would cost you your job, and the American people are entitled to a Secretary of State who tells them the truth even when the president doesn't want to hear it, and my constituents, our service members, deserve better.
Did you notice the sidestep that just unfolded? Secretary Rubio confidently portrayed Operation Epic Fury as a clear-cut success. Yet when it came time to support that claim with concrete economic evidence, he never actually addressed the question. Instead, he avoided the central issue entirely. He made no mention of the fact that this was already the 97th day of an ongoing conflict, with the strait still closed and financial pressure continuing to mount for Americans at home. When a senior government official under oath declines to confront the true state of a war, it becomes more than routine political maneuvering. It begins to reveal a much broader story. Jacobs entered that hearing with something many lawmakers rarely bring into these exchanges: a detailed record of costs the administration had not publicly laid out. $100 billion was not a speculative estimate, nor was it a worst-case figure produced by an advocacy organization. It was an estimate already circulating at the time, based on the direct expenses of military operations, logistics, equipment, and the enormous disruptions to global energy markets caused by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Before the first American strike, that strategic waterway carried roughly 20% of the world's traded oil every single day. Once it was shut down, the consequences extended far beyond the Persian Gulf. The impact reached gas pumps in Ohio, grocery delivery networks in Florida, and home heating bills across New England. Jacobs pointed to the fact that the average American family was already paying about $450 more for fuel. She also cited projections suggesting that figure could climb by another $2,000 before the end of the year. That was not simply a political talking point crafted for a congressional hearing. It reflected a pattern economists have documented repeatedly. When a major global oil transit route is disrupted, even temporarily, prices often remain elevated well after the immediate crisis because markets react to uncertainty and perceived risk, not just to reduce supply. Rubio's response was notable. He acknowledged that the United States was also dealing with inflation. That answer was revealing because, perhaps unintentionally, it reinforced Jacobs' broader argument. If the administration defines success by pointing to Iran's economic hardship, while simultaneously admitting Americans are also bearing serious economic pain, then its own definition of victory begins to unravel. Earlier in the hearing, Rubio had outlined what he considered military success: crippling Iran's defense industrial capacity, significantly reducing its missile launchers and drone inventory, grounding much of its remaining air force, and neutralizing its conventional navy. Those are legitimate military objectives, and the administration has reason to argue that at least some of them were accomplished. Jacobs, however, responded with information she said was based on assessments from the intelligence community itself, not opposition research. According to those assessments, Iran was rebuilding its military-industrial capabilities more quickly than expected. Around 70% of its missile arsenal reportedly remained intact, along with roughly 70% of its mobile launchers. Rubio's immediate reaction to those figures was not to dispute the numbers directly, but to question whether the intelligence reports themselves were genuine. His exact response was, "If they are publicly reported, someone committed a crime and is also lying." That is a remarkable statement for a Secretary of State to make during an open congressional hearing. Did you catch the deflection that just played out? Secretary Rubio confidently described Operation Epic Fury as a decisive success, but when he was asked to back up that claim with solid economic evidence, he never truly answered the question. Instead, he sidestepped the issue altogether. He made no acknowledgement that this was already the 97th day of an ongoing conflict, with the strait still closed and the financial burden on Americans continuing to grow. When a senior official testifying under oath avoids addressing the actual conditions of a war, it becomes more than ordinary political maneuvering. It raises much larger questions about the full picture. Jacobs entered the hearing with something many members of Congress rarely bring into these exchanges: a detailed accounting of costs the administration had not openly presented. The $100 billion figure was not a rough estimate or a worst-case projection produced by an advocacy group. It was an estimate already circulating at the time, based on the direct expenses of military operations, logistics, equipment, and the severe disruptions to global energy markets caused by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Before the first American strike, that narrow waterway handled approximately 20% of the world's traded oil every day. Once it was shut down, the consequences extended far beyond the Persian Gulf. The impact reached fuel pumps in Ohio, grocery transportation routes in Florida, and home heating costs throughout New England. Jacobs highlighted that the average American family was already paying roughly $450 more for gasoline. She also referenced projections indicating those additional costs could rise by another $2,000 before the end of the year. That was not merely a political argument crafted for a congressional hearing. It reflected a trend economists have repeatedly observed. When a major global oil shipping route is disrupted, even for a short period, price increases often outlast the disruption itself because markets react to uncertainty and future risk, not simply to immediate supply shortages. Rubio's reply was especially noteworthy. He pointed out that the United States was also experiencing inflation. Ironically, that response reinforced the very point Jacobs was making. If the administration measures success by emphasizing Iran's economic damage while acknowledging that Americans are also facing growing economic hardship, then its own definition of victory becomes much harder to defend. Earlier in the hearing, Rubio outlined what he considered the administration's military achievements: severely damaging Iran's defense industrial infrastructure, significantly reducing its missile launchers and drone capabilities, grounding much of its remaining air force, and neutralizing its conventional naval forces. Those are legitimate military objectives, and the administration can reasonably argue that some of them were achieved. Jacobs countered with information she said came from the intelligence community's own assessments rather than political opposition research. According to those reports, Iran was rebuilding its military-industrial capacity more quickly than expected. Approximately 70% of its missile stockpile reportedly remained intact, along with about 70% of its mobile missile launchers. Rubio's immediate response was not to directly challenge those figures, but instead to question the legitimacy of the intelligence reports themselves. His exact words were, "If they are publicly reported, someone committed a crime and is also lying." That is a striking statement for a Secretary of State to make during an open congressional hearing. Ironically, it also created exactly the impression Jacobs appeared to be aiming for. Regardless of the full story behind the shoes, they became a symbol that reinforced her broader argument. To many viewers, they suggested someone willing to go along with an obvious distraction instead of simply addressing the issue directly. Whether that comparison was completely fair or not, it was certainly memorable. The image of the Secretary of State, the former Florida senator, the presidential candidate who came close to securing the Republican nomination in 2016, sitting before Congress and asking what she was referring to, is not the kind of moment that disappears quickly. It is the sort of exchange that lingers long after the hearing ends. The most significant question left unanswered by this hearing is also the one that deserves the greatest attention. If the administration defines victory in military terms, missile launchers destroyed, naval forces neutralized, and an air force largely dismantled, while Jacobs measures the outcome in economic and human costs, $100 billion spent, 14 American lives lost, hundreds wounded, the strait remaining closed, and Iran's nuclear incentives growing stronger, then the two sides were not necessarily arguing over the same facts. They were arguing over what should actually be counted. So what is the proper standard for judging a military operation that accomplishes many of its stated battlefield objectives while also shutting down the world's most critical oil shipping route, increasing nuclear tensions with the very nation it targeted, and leaving American families paying hundreds of dollars more at the gas pump? There is no simple equation that settles that debate. Rubio and Jacobs were looking at the same conflict through completely different lenses. Their disagreement ultimately came down to two very different definitions of success. What should concern any careful observer is the direction events were taking. By day 97, the blockade remained in place, and the president himself had suggested it could continue through Labor Day. Rubio also described an Iranian government so fractured that receiving a response reportedly took 7 to 10 days. History shows that governments facing severe economic collapse, military setbacks, and continuing nuclear ambitions do not become more stable. More often, they become increasingly unpredictable. The historical record on that point has been remarkably consistent. Not become more cautious. It becomes more desperate. Iran's accelerating reconstitution of its military-industrial base, if the intelligence assessments Jacob cited are accurate, is exactly what that pattern looks like in real time. There is one more thing worth naming, something that was in the room but never quite said directly. Rubio came to that hearing as the nation's chief diplomat, the person whose job is fundamentally to find durable political solutions to conflicts that military force alone cannot resolve. The war in Iran, whatever one calls it, whatever metrics one applies to measure its outcome, is still an open situation. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. Fire was exchanged over Carr Island the night before this testimony. No deal has been reached. In that context, the question of who won is not just rhetorical. It is the operative question for every negotiation that still has to happen. And if the administration's lead negotiator cannot offer a candid accounting of where things actually stand, that affects the credibility of every conversation still to come. How we judge the real cost of this conflict and whether we can trust the leaders who manage it is a debate that is far from over. But we want to hear from you. Should our leaders have to give a straight answer on a $100 billion conflict, or is avoiding the facts just part of the job in Washington? Drop your comments below. If you want to help us keep digging into these official hearings and bringing the truth to the public, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel right now. Thank you for watching.